Right out the gate, I know the title seems mostly positive, but I do have some gripes with this episode. The first main one being that doing a 3-month time jump arguably skips past one of the most interesting periods that the show has over the game, which is the recovery from a massive infected attack. That overhanging, suffocating atmosphere of death and sorrow, and seeing our characters navigate through that emotionally would have been great. The episode still explores the loss of Joel through our main characters, but applying that loss to the whole city and the recovery efforts I think is an interesting addition that I wish the show had. Fast forwarding 3 months kind of kneecaps that insane momentum from episode 2 and suppresses that trauma since time inherently heals wounds. Also, on a micro level, managing a hospital in the post-apocalyptic environment would have been pretty suspenseful since at any moment, one of the patients could spring up as an infected if they missed a bite mark. There's just so many explorations left on the table that it makes doing a big time jump seem like it hurts the show more than it helps it. I'd be fine with like a week time jump since the characters would still be in a raw state, but 3 months kind of felt like overkill since the collective community has mostly moved past this major tragedy. We essentially skip past the stage of mourning to rebuilding and moving on. It would have also been interesting if in this period we follow Gail's perspective of a therapist trying to heal the entire community, which inadvertently overwhelms her and she breaks down, instead of briefly alluding to her mental state with Tommy's dialogue scene. Now, I know I'm coming in pretty hot with me bashing this aspect, but this overall episode I think is a major improvement over the game in which they have only a few scenes in Jackson before going to Seattle. That point in the story is very rushed and is one of my biggest gripes, even though it's more of a problem with the medium in which the pacing is very tricky. So having an entire episode elaborate on this period of the story is a fundamental improvement. It fleshes out how the characters feel and especially how Jackson plays into this. Because in the game, since they don't have that major event in which the settlement gets attacked, it feels implausible about why they aren't going after Abby's team. It operates as a contrivance in which Neil Druckmann obviously doesn't want a big party going after Abby, but didn't give a compelling enough reason to justify why Jackson isn't more committed in avenging their dead. So exploring that in depth places a band-aid on another flaw within the game. So going into a scene that fleshes this out, we have the council scene. Not only does this scene breathe more depth into Jackson, but it largely explores the themes of revenge in a realistic and interesting way. Hearing different perspectives on the subject, like forgiveness is the best solution to revenge, forgiveness being a weakness that can be exploited, and especially Ellie's perspective here in that she swaps out the notion of revenge for justice. That's such an interesting distinction because they're on two separate ends of the spectrum for what's socially acceptable, while also insinuating that Ellie is basing this argument on a lie in which the attackers are carrying out unprompted violence and not their own justice. This blurs the line between revenge and justice, giving Ellie a more nuanced motivation where she may genuinely believe that this is justice. It vindicates her drive this season and buries the deeper and darker retribution that she's seeking. I also like how Seth is characterized more here and becomes more than just a one-off hateful character. His speech was literally the personification of this meme where one man stands up against the rest and speaks his unpopular opinion. It's filled with emotion and grit, and the irony of this character helping Ellie and her seeing past his flaws is a nice little addition to the story. Then before moving on, I think the editing of this scene was great, balancing multiple perspectives and reaction shots that convey so much information. We're picking up on so many beats of storytelling that exist outside of the script, and this also highlights great directing. Which I normally don't go in depth on these aspects because they're always operating at an absolute high point. I think we kind of take for granted how amazingly crafted these shows are, and people tend to overlook these aspects. Balancing out the positives with another critique, we get an introduction of this mysterious new group of people. I'll refrain from labeling them since we technically don't know what they're called yet, but after thinking about this introduction some more, it's a pretty major downgrade from the game. Without going into spoilers, the way they handle the scene mostly robs the mystery of who these people are. In the game, there's a lot more build-up, intrigue, and horror surrounding this new unknown group. Since it is a game, we don't break from Ellie's perspective to receive this display of exposition of who these people are and how different mechanics work within their community, like whistling. So when they come into the game, it's much more sudden and terrifying because this is our first interaction with them, and we have to figure out what's going on. How they interact with the upcoming story will still be pretty effective in the show. I just think this change downgrades how effective they can be. Although it does establish that there is a wider conflict going on outside of the bubble of Jackson. But I feel as though they could have alluded to that without us receiving too much information on who they are. Let's do our daily check-in with Ellie's character, since that'll be a perpetual debate throughout the season. I said in my last review that Joel's death will probably harden Ellie and she won't be as obnoxious moving forward, and I'd say that was mostly correct so far. I was a little worried in the therapy scene, but I think Ellie was leaning more into that abrasive and obnoxious aspect as a defense mechanism. Ellie just lost the person she was the closest to, so instead of embracing that daunting cloud shadowing over her character, she'd rather avoid the subject by pestering Gale and others, thus driving them away and repressing her inner emotions. She also doesn't really act like this with the people she's truly close to. She does have the capacity to open up and deal with things with more maturity. It illustrates that Ellie has grown a bit and she wants to take on a darker direction. The general discourse surrounding her character is treated with barely any nuance, and I feel like there's genuinely more to read into her character outside of her just being annoying. Also, I think the scene where she's going through Joel's things was perfectly adapted from the game. Great acting, which is a controversial opinion apparently, and even the scene with Dina had a lot of nuance, in terms of navigating that scene of Dina coming clean about holding onto vital information for 3 months. I especially like that minor interaction where Tommy is kind of upset that she withheld this information but understands that it was to protect Ellie from getting herself killed. Isabella Merced as Dina is really just stealing every scene she's in. I think she has a better balance of levity and maturity and kind of brings out the best in Ellie. Ellie doesn't have to default on any kind of defense mechanisms around Dina and kind of opens herself up in a more authentic way for her. It's also interesting in terms of where their current dynamic is because their point of progression is a bit different in the game, and I just hope their endpoints are the same character-wise, which they probably will be. Addressing this episode overall from the perspective of pace, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't spend even more time in Jackson. That may seem kind of crazy, and I thought this episode was going to end after the graveyard scene, and episode 4 would be the start of the Seattle trip. I did see some people upset that the trip was extremely rushed, which may seem pretty jarring since season 1 is like an entire season journey across the country, but to be fair, the game also kind of just teleports the characters to Seattle. This is such a massive and long story to the point that we really don't have time to flesh out this entire trip, and I think it was fine cross-dissolving through most of it. And even then, we still get a couple scenes in this time, which doesn't make going to Seattle as jarring as it is in the game. I'm also really glad that we're back in a city environment. That aspect in season 1 from a visual effects and production design standpoint was breathtaking. So applying that to another city that is even more run down through time is exciting to see. The attention to detail is staggering and makes this world so much more immersive, because we've especially have never seen something like this before in the regard of how run down the civilization is, and actually having our characters move through environments that showcase that. Although I haven't seen some of the recent Walking Dead shows, so I don't know if they have anywhere near as good of a production value as The Last of Us. Seeing Seattle in this setting is going to make the production of the upcoming episodes be pretty insane, and I was already blown away by that aspect just in Jackson alone, and how they've been filming in grand and real environments. Before wrapping up this video, there's also one major deviation, but addressing it is a spoiler. Anyone who's played the game is probably worried about it, and I'm reserving judgment until we get more episodes. And it'll most likely still happen, but under different circumstances. It's also pretty crazy that there's already only 4 episodes left in the season, and going in, I was accepting of the fact that adapting The Last of Us Part 2 would take 2 seasons. But now that we're actually somewhat close to the end despite just just starting. It feels rough that we're only getting 7 episodes after 3 years. I know the strikes have impacted the show and have led to this unfortunate turn of events. I just don't know if it would have been better making a longer single season that comes out later. But even that is questionable since I'm assuming that streamers are pushing shortened seasons on us, which feels terrible. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode. My socials are in the description, and have a great day. Thanks as always to my absolutely goated top patrons, Logan Farmer and Simply Put.